Okay, concerning the claims of the Orthodox and the Catholic Church concerning the papacy and the ecclesiology, it's like essentially you can find the seeds of Orthodox ecclesiology or the seeds of Catholic ecclesiology. And it comes, maybe a good place to highlight this is in the story of Agatho at the Ecumenical Council, and the church accepts his confession, his letter, which seems to be a kind of essentially a Vatican II style ecclesiology. But then later they reject Pope Honorius as a heretic. So there's two ways to kind of resolve this tension. You can resolve it in both directions toward the Orthodox way by saying that by reinterpreting Agatho to not be Vatican I, or you can interpret it in the Catholic direction by saying that Honorius wasn't actually a heretic. He wasn't, making some sort of distinction in line with Vatican I, that he wasn't teaching in his universal capacity as a universal magisterium. Well, essentially, you can always take any data from a proof text and you can interpret it in either direction. And so that means that ultimately you have a stalemate. And both sides acknowledge that saints can be wrong, that popes can be wrong. So there's no, you still have a symmetry. There's no symmetry breaker there. Like Jay wanted to say that the Catholics do have a kind of a symmetry breaker because their system is based on one man, and if that man is in error, it contradicts Vatican I, and therefore he was specifically pointing out like the brain in the mosque contradicts, is in a kind of apostasy, and if the Pope could be an apostate, then that would contradict Vatican I and then destroy the whole system, because he's thinking system thinking. But with the paradigms of system thinking, you can always interpret data according to your paradigm, and so there's a stalemate. And essentially, even all these statements that seem to be pro-Catholic ecclesiology in the early church, like essentially can be just interpreted away in a variety of ways. Because, as Jay was saying, even the Orthodox Church doesn't believe, or it's not necessary to the Orthodox hypothesis that the Orthodox Church can immediately recognize dangerous doctrines, just that over time you would recognize them and you could get rid of them. For instance, Pope Agatho might be wrong, or even the Ecumenical Council could be wrong in accepting Pope Agatho, but they wouldn't have known it until that it was such a dangerous doctrine until later. And that's why ultimately in both positions also acknowledge that you really don't need history to teach you about the Orthodox Church, because the contemporary church is authoritative enough to teach you everything you need to know. Because you're receiving it from your father, he's receiving it from his father in a chain, and the Holy Spirit's behind that chain, and so you don't have to worry about interpreting Saint Athanasius or Saint Gregory the Great, which you might incorrectly interpret them. You just receive what your immediate fathers in the faith told you, and so Jay, or Eastern Orthodox, accepts that the papacy is a false doctrine because that's how they received it from their fathers. It's a system, it's a paradigm, and that's about it. Then you reinterpret every verse according to that. And even Fortescue says this as much as that you don't need the data of history to prove a point of Catholic doctrine, because you have the Magisterium, which is allowed to teach you, authoritative to teach you anything. So, but ultimately, the other point of view is that the tradition is the material out of which the Magisterium operates, forming doctrine. So, like, without the doctrine without the material of history, then in tradition you wouldn't have the content of the Magisterium. But Fortescue does say that ultimately, if you find data that contradicts a doctrine, then that's proof against it. But just because it's totally absent wouldn't count against it if the authoritative magisterium can teach it now.